Back in the days of film, answering the question, what should I do with my pictures, was relatively straightforward. If you shot negative film, then chances are you send it away, get it processed, get back a set of imprints and put the good ones in an album and maybe get the really good ones blown up and enlarged. If you shot slides, then you'd use them for the slideshow, show to family and friends, and possibly, again, if you've got a good picture, you might get it enlarged for a print on the wall. When we move on to the digital area, things are a little bit broader. For the casual photographer using a smartphone, or just a family and friends, then there's lots of social media outlets, Instagram, Facebook, where you can put your pictures. If you're more of an enthusiast, then the options perhaps are a little less clear cut. And what I want to do in this video is to give 3 examples where I find outlets for my pictures to broaden my enjoyment and derive some benefit from my photography. As an alternative to setting up my own website, I use the 500px image site to display my images. The good thing about this is that not only does it give me a free platform, providing I'm prepared to accept some limitations on the number of uploads I make per week, it gives me an opportunity to get some feedback on what people like or dislike about pictures. Now, the feature that I use primarily is to set up a gallery. And if I click on this, you'll see that I have a number of galleries. Some of them are not really very active now, but the one I'm using most commonly is for my daily dog walk pictures on the local National Trust property of Croom Park. So what I can do here is I can upload these pictures. I think my limit is 6 a week, and I very rarely hit that. I'm trying to put some of the better pictures up. And what you can do is you can set the resolution so you can see a reasonably high resolution picture on the screen. And this gives people the opportunity to comment and to vote on your pictures. I try not to get involved too much in exchange of comments. I will obviously respond as a courtesy to anybody who comments on my pictures. I tend not to comment on other people's pictures, although I do indicate likes. And the reason for that is I want to use this platform very much to get a feedback on my images, not to generate likes simply because I have actively developed a following. I want this to be as dispassionate as possible so that I can use it as a way of establishing what people like and what people don't like. And what you can see here is, take this image as an example, it's got 117 likes, total views 1500. I'm looking to get around maybe 10% likes to views to give me an idea that the picture is reasonably popular. And what 500px does is it creates a pulse, which is basically an assessment of how popular your picture is based on the number of likes it gets compared with total number of views. And this is scaled, I think, from 0 to 100, and basically anything over 80 is flagged as popular, and I think anything over 90 you can say has been reasonably well liked. So if I pick a couple of other pictures just to give an illustration of this, this picture I put up probably should have done, it's a fairly banal image, and what you can see here is this just gets 30 views. It just about makes it into the popular, but it doesn't get anywhere near the impact that I get from the other pictures. So following on from my previous video about composition and how to develop composition and how style evolves from what you like and the way in which your style develops, your compositions develop naturally. What you can do with 500px is to actually get some idea of what other people think, but you can also look at other people's pictures and you can select by genre, say landscape photography, wildlife photography, and you can select by popularity. So you can look at the most popular to see what people are liking in that area, and you can form your own opinions. So subjectively you can build a view of your own compositional preferences, whether or not you move on to try to be analytical about what elements contribute to a good composition is up to you. Personally, I think that can, certainly at the early stages, be counterproductive. So that's 500px, a way of displaying your images as an alternative to a website, which has some cost benefits, also has some benefits in terms of helping you to develop your skills and to assess the views of others on your work. If you want to move beyond that, then you can look at specifically trying to sell your images through stock imaging sites. And as I said, you can use 500px for that purpose, but I've gone down a different route. When it comes to selling stock images, my preferred site is the Alamy site. And I've been putting images up onto the Alamy site for about 15 years now, and I've got somewhere around 800-900 images up there. And so if you're contemplating the move from being purely amateur to becoming a professional photographer, Alamy, or a stock image site, is a relatively easy way to dip your toe in the water. There are no costs associated with this. Alamy makes its money by taking a commission on any of your images that it sells, and I think at the moment the contributor's contribution is 60%, Alamy is 40%, but there are some variations in that depending on exclusivity. Now, what you can do with this is basically upload your images, and there is a page that explains the benefits of selling your images, how to sell your images, and gives you the opportunity to seek clarification for points you may not understand. Basically, there is a web-based image upload facility. Now, the Alamy collection is not curated, and basically what that means is that they don't put any limits on content apart from those that are required for legal reasons and possibly extremes of public taste. And basically, acceptance criteria is based purely on technical merit. Now, if you're one of these people who's constantly wondering whether your gear is good enough, there is an interesting story here. When I started submitting images to Alamy, say 15 years ago, I had a Nikon D70. I think it was 6.7 megapixels. At that time, Alamy's technical requirements were that they needed a 49 megapixel image. Now, in 2005, even the best available digital cameras would struggle to make that. So it was accepted that images would be interpolated up. And with the Nikon D70, the 6.7 megapixel camera, I could upscale using the software recommended by Alamy to 49 megapixels, and sometimes I could meet the technical requirements, sometimes I couldn't. And basically, the wider angle landscape shots were difficult. There simply weren't enough pixels in the image to define small regions of interest. So at that stage, once I started getting involved with submitting images to Alamy and finding that I was struggling to meet technical requirements in some cases, I upscaled my camera from a D70 to a D200 and went from 6.7 to a 10 megapixel camera. And even that small leap meant that basically I was able to meet the technical requirements. Now I'm making that point really because you would think that now we've gone from cameras that typically were around the 7 megapixels to now that are typically around the 24 megapixels on and greater, that sites like Alamy would have pushed up their technical requirements. In fact, the converse is true. Alamy has pretty much done away with the minimum megapixel requirement, and they've done away with their list of required cameras. And I think the reason for that is in part that things like smartphones are now able to develop provide high resolution images of sufficient quality, and the other thing is that the commercial usage has moved from print towards web-based, and there simply isn't the need for lots of images with more than 2 megapixels. So if you're thinking about stock images, then it's very unlikely that the resolution of your camera is going to be a limiting factor. So what happens with Alamy? You submit your images, they go into a technical assessment, into quality control assessment. If they pass, you are then asked to keyword them, put a caption and a keyword. And once you've done that and gone through that process, which is all outlined and you're taken through it on the website, your images go on sale. And what you will find, particularly if you take landscape pictures, is you probably won't get very many sales. And you can look at the frequently asked questions and find the sorts of things that sell. But very much they tend to be lifestyle based or travel based. And so if you're purely interested in the sort of landscape photography that puts pictures on the wall, there probably isn't an awful lot of demand on Alamy. However, having said that, if you take pictures with people in them that can be used in the likes of holiday brochures, then there may well be a market. But there is an issue here. If you've not done anything with commercial photography, stock images, then you need to be aware that if you put up pictures of people where the person is clearly visible and that picture is intended for commercial use, you will need a model release, and that is explained on the Alamy site. However, Alamy allows you to license your images in two ways. You can either set a royalty-free license, which means the person buys the right to use that picture and can use it for any purpose. In that case, you have to have a model release. Alternatively, you can sell rights managed, which I think is the preferred route on Alamy. And basically what that means is the person buys the right to use that picture for a particular purpose at a particular size for a particular duration of time. And because the usage is constrained, you can actually then put that image up and say, this image may have people in it, but I don't have a model release. Then it's up to the person who purchased the image to make sure that they actually have established whether or not they need a model release. The third suggestion I have for things to do with your photos is to suggest that you offer your services as a volunteer photographer for some charitable organisation that may benefit from having a photographer able to take pictures to help them promote their work. Now, as I said earlier, one of my main opportunities for taking pictures is at my local National Trust site, and so I offered my services as a volunteer photographer to take pictures to help them in their work. And this came about very much as a result of a chance encounter with the local marketing and publicity officer. And it started off with me just sending in pictures from time to time, and led on a little bit more to requests for specific images. So this is the current National Trust Crew website, and this picture of the house is one of my images, and you see that they will give me a credit for that on there. So it's a sense of satisfaction that somebody's deriving benefit from my images, but also it's a level of exposure that it probably would be more difficult to get via any other route. And so on this opening page here, the second picture up, this is another picture I took of one of the architectural features on the site, the rotunda, and again I get a credit. The third one here is a little bit different. This is another of the sites, and this was a requested picture, and this building had just been regenerated, and somewhat earlier I'd taken a series of pictures of the interior for some promotional event that the National Trust were holding here, and it showed the building, but it did show the decoration in fairly poor state. So having had it redecorated, I was asked to go back and take the pictures again to give them a before and after. So not only does it give me a sense of satisfaction, it gives me a degree of exposure, but also it gives me experience of working to a brief that I am given. I receive a request for specific images to show specific features, and I have to solve issues with regard to lighting and composition and so forth. given that most of my prior interests were around landscape and wildlife photography, this was an interesting challenge and gave me some chance to broaden my experience. On the website, there are also other promotional images. I think all three of these are pictures I took over the last couple of years. So I do get some significant exposure from this. But leading on from the local site work, I had the opportunity to start submitting images to the National Trust's own stock image site. Now, the National Trust have very strict rules regarding the putting of images onto commercial imaging sites. They've got their own stock image site. They don't want people putting images of their properties on other sites. So basically, my previous example talking about stock images, I couldn't put National Trust stock images on the Alamy site. In fact, a few years ago, Alamy had a purge of all National Trust images at the National Trust request. So if I want to put images on a stock image site, they go on the National Trust site. Don't make me any money, but again, they get me some exposure and a degree of satisfaction that somebody at least is getting some value. Now, if I go to the main National Trust site here, this is the whole of the UK site, and again you see that there are images up here, and this one here is an image that I took of Croom about 18 months ago, and as you can see, the National Trust have used that to promote their celebration of the 125th anniversary. So it's an incredible amount of satisfaction for seeing that image used in that way. But in addition, they have placed that image onto a number of social media platforms. And one of those was Instagram. And it's quite interesting to note that I put that image up on Instagram. I haven't been using Instagram for very long, haven't got a very large following, and that image got 13 likes. When the National Trust put it on Instagram, it got 13,000 likes. So again, this sort of volunteer activity can be very useful in broadening your exposure. So there's a win all round. The people that you contribute the images to clearly derive a benefit. It saves them possibly the cost of employing a professional photographer, and for you, immense sense of satisfaction, very valuable feedback, and enormous exposure. Just a final word about the National Trust imaging site. That is a curated site. So not only have your images, the images that I submit there, have to meet technical requirements, they also are assessed for their aesthetic contribution and how well they meet the publicity brief and the ethos of the National Trust. So again, it gives you valuable feedback onto how an end user will view and respond to the images you submit. Well, I've given you 3 examples of what I do with my pictures, and I should probably make it clear at this stage, although I've mentioned 500px as a social media site and Alamy as a stock image site, I've no particular affiliations to either, and you may well find other sites that suit you better. Certainly PhotoCrowd for social media is a very good site for serious photographers and offers the added attraction of regular competitions. And there are also a range of other stock image sites besides Alamy. I use Alamy simply because when I started it was one of the few that were around. There are more now. And it may well be that some of those others will suit you better. But from my point of view, the important thing is doing a little bit more with my pictures than leaving them sit on my hard drive, barely looked at from the day that I took them. So hopefully this video has given you some idea of what you might do with some of your images over and above what you're doing already. And I hope you find it enjoyable. Many thanks. Bye.